Hi, and welcome back. We're going to have a look at Razor Pages in this model. We had a look at it a bit before where we introduced you to the concept of a page, and now we're going to have a look at it outside of Visual Studio Code and the command line. We're going to get started in Visual Studio.
Right, so we've been doing our stuff in Visual Studio Code. You can see here we goofed around a little bit and we made a couple of pages. You'll remember though that we started from an empty template.
Yeah.
So we went from nothing, we went from a Hello World console app into something with pages. I'm going to close Visual Studio Code and I am going to go out here to Visual Studio proper, Visual Studio for Windows.
Yep.
You might be on Visual Studio for Mac if you're on a Mac. And in this particular case, I'm going to be using Visual Studio 2017 Community.
Yeah.
You can go and get this at visualstudio.com.
For free.
For free. Works just nice. It's great. Visual Studio Community has a couple of small restrictions based on the size of your company. But if you're doing this as an open source person or as a person who's learning, Visual Studio Community is effectively pro. It's effectively the pro version. It lets you have extensions. It's a great little tool. All right, so what I'm going to do is, you can see, just to familiarize yourself with the UI here, I've got some recents and things. I've got new project. You can say create new project. On the left-hand side, you may see different stuff depending on what you installed. When I ran the installer for Visual Studio, I set up for the web workload. It's called the workload. You might have Android, you might not, but you want to make sure that you have the .NET Core web workload.
And quick question, you mentioned the Visual Studio installer. That does come when you download Visual Studio.
Yeah, so when you install it, good point, let me bring that up. When you install it, you're going to get this application. This is Visual Studio installers coming up here, one moment. And the installer is modular, okay? So it'll come up like this. And if I say modify, you can run the installer multiple times. You can run the installer after you've installed Visual Studio if you wanted to add other stuff. Oh, see, look, even the installer itself wants to update. So right now, just coincidentally, the installer has new stuff that it wants to give me. So it's going to go in and update itself. While it's doing that, you download this thing called a bootstrapper. It's a tiny little installer that goes and gets the things that you want. Visual Studio could be quite large if you installed everything. Or it could install in 20 minutes if you just wanted to do web apps or you just wanted to do Windows apps.
So this allows you to customize your install.
Exactly, and the things that you customize them with are called workloads. So like the cloud workload or the mobile device workload. So here, there you go, it just updated itself. You can see that I have, at the time of this recording, Visual Studio Community 15.4. You should make sure that you have at least that or higher. If I click on Modify, it's going to go and give me some more choices. And I'm doing this, of course, after the fact. I picked Universal Windows, I picked .NET Desktop, I picked ASP.NET.
But you can see so many other options. You have Python, Node, data science.
And I could add these things afterwards. So if I wanted to do Linux development in C++, I would click that, and it'll go and update and tell me, right now it's thinking about how much more it needs to download in order to get me that stuff. And then from within that, you can go into individual components and pick on the specific things that you want, right? So you see I've selected F# as well. This can be run multiple times, and I just wanted to point out that I ran it and installed the web workload. So installing the web workload, when I went File, New Project, is what gives me this choice here for saying web pages. So Visual C#, web pages, and I've got the ASP.NET web applications using the .NET framework, the full framework that comes with Windows, or ASP.NET Core web apps, which work on, of course, Linux and Mac and Windows, which is what we're doing today. All right?
All right.
Good stuff. So I'm going to double-click on that. I've said File, New Project. And it's going to pop up a dialog here. You're going to want to double-check this drop-down. You might have it default to like Core 1.0 or 1.1. You're going to want to be 2.0 or higher. You'll notice that the icons change based on what you pick. I can make Angular apps or React.js apps. I can make full model view controller applications. We're just going to say web app, which is the default.
Okay.
This gives us both Razor Pages that we're doing today, and of course Razor Pages are a part of or built on top of model view controller.
Okay.
So it's really the best choice for everybody. the most recent project template. And if you were doing that from the command line, do you remember what the command was for that?
Razor.
.NET new
New
Razor.
yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so I'll double click on that. And when we create that, we're going to watch the right-hand side over here where it says Solution Explorer. This will get you the same output as if you had said .NET New Razor. This is important, that .NET New Web or .NET New MVC.
It's the same experience.
It's the same experience. You don't want to have a different experience for Visual Studio Code people than you do for Visual Studio Proper people.
So the templating does match, because before you had to use a bit of Yeoman over in one place.
Right. All the templating is matched and is nice and clean. There's a little helper page that shows up there, but we're going to zoom in over here and see how Visual Studio for Windows expresses itself. You can see we've got a couple more pages than before. We've got an About page and a Contact page. And where would those paths be, given what we learned about Razor paths?
/about, /contact, /error, oh, index would be default.
Index would be default, exactly, right? Now, interestingly, these have something underneath them.
Yeah.
So these are the code behinds or the page models. That's the page, and that's the page model, and they've nested those. This is an important little thing to point out. Let's look at this in Windows Explorer, just to make sure. If I say open in Windows Explorer,
They should appear as two separate files?
they are two separate files. So here's index and index CSHTML. They are clearly two separate files. But it's kind of convenient, and it gives you a sense of the relationship between the files, that the Solution Explorer in Visual Studio will go and nest them.
So could you think about it as the car and then the engine?
Yeah, you could do that. Anything that is any kind of hierarchy.
Yeah.
And then beneath that .cs, it gets even more interesting. It turns into a class explorer.
Okay.
These are not files, of course. That's a property and that's a method. But now we're kind of blurring the lines, and now you're really looking at conceptual bits of things. And as you make changes, those will update. So that gives you, that's something that you see in Visual Studio that you don't see in Visual Studio Code. I can do that with all of my C# classes. So remember before startup and configure services and all that?
Yeah.
Same kind of deal. Also, things like our app settings JSON, which we used earlier in the previous module for configuration. If there is something that has like an environment, like app settings.production.json or app settings.json, that's something we didn't yet talk about.
No.
Remember before when I did that, I commented that line out so that I could see the
exception page.
Where was
Yeah.
that? Do you remember where that was?
Yeah, so I believe it was in your startup.
There it is.
Yeah.
So here's use developer exception page. And if you recall, it was, if you're in development, do that. Every time we ran the thing, it kept saying we were in production.
Yes.
I grew frustrated, and I just went like that, which got me past that problem, but isn't correct. Okay? We'll go and right-click Properties. And is it Build or is it Debug?
Go to,
Debug.
there we go. And then you add it.
Yeah. So the environment variable, ASP.NET Core _ environment equals development, is the thing that makes the difference. So tying that back to configuration, you can have different configuration options. You can have app settings dot whatever, and whatever, literally whatever, like foo,
Anything.
testing, staging,
Okay.
right? Whatever makes you happy. So in this case here, one app settings JSON has some stuff in it. Looks like it's got, oops, wrong button. Some logging that we'll learn about a little later. And then development, look at the difference between the two. One is set for warnings and one is set for debug.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, right? So a little bit of information there. So more sophisticated than what we had originally set up. Let's return over to startup and see what else is different. So we've got that configuration that we did before. We've got services.add MVC. Here's an exception handler. This is an interesting little bit of code right here. So if we're in development, show the exception page that I like as a developer. Or if you're in production or really anything but development, we're just going to show the error. That way we don't give away our source code and
Okay.
show people stuff. Now you had me use MVC before.
Yes.
This one has a little bit more information with different routes. We'll talk about that another time. And then we've also got static files in case you wanted to pick up a file. Remember the couple of times we tried to pick up a file and it was skipping right past it because we didn't put the @ page?
Yes.
It would have served that file if it found it on disk if we had said static files.
So if we had added that line of code into the previous experiment, it would have just worked.
It wouldn't have worked. It would have picked the file up and served it to us. But it would have picked it up as a static file.
And not in what it intended. Okay.
And not as a Razor page and actually executed the code. So the order of these things matter, and also whether or not you want to run that or pick it up as a static file, like a GIF or an HTML page. All right? So that's a little bit of a tour. Am I missing anything? I think that sounds
No,
good.
That's good.
Actually, one other point. Underneath www root, that's where your static things go. We've got our images there and our CSS. The pages, the static things are served out of root. And then the pages for our Razor Pages app are located in pages. But when I want to have an image, like /images/something, it's served out of www root.
So there's one thing that's new, is the view imports, layouts.
Good point. So remember when we were goofing around earlier, and over here we had our page, and we had inject, and that wasn't enough, and then we needed an @using, and then suddenly we had more directives than we had code.
Yeah.
That was a little weird. Well, you can do a thing called view imports, which is all of the things that you want every page to have, right? So we want every page to use this namespace, and every other one to, this is using a namespace, and this is the namespace of those pages themselves. There's also a thing called tag helpers that we'll talk about in the intermediate day.
Yes, we will.
And then view start is a piece of code, multiple lines, as many as you like, that runs for every view.
Okay.
All right, so if every view needed to check someone's name or check for cookies or whatever, like it depends how you want to do things. But these are the imports, all the different injects, all the different usings, and this is the little bit of code you want. In this case here, it's setting a layout. That's like the main page that every other page wraps around. So here, layout.cshtml is a Razor page that has the top level HTML, it has the head, it has the CSS.
Probably has a footer somewhere.
Yep, footer's down here. There's some Bootstrap and some different JavaScript. And then your Razor page is called the body.
And it's rendered right there.
It's rendered right there. So this is a good point, actually. Let me do this. Begin body and body. Okay?
Okay.
Let's run this. So this one is a little bit bigger, of course, than our previous application, so it might take a moment to fire up.
Okay. And if you go to another one of the pages, let's say the home page.
Good point. This is the home page. Let's go to About.
Yeah, it should be on. Okay.
Okay, so that's everything that's outside. Then this bit here would be
Everything coming from the page.
right here.
Yeah.
So start my page, end my page. Make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Cool. So I'm just undoing all of that. Little Control Z. And we will come back in a moment and try to build something that is non-trivial.
Exactly.
And we'll probably make a couple mistakes.
And it happens.
And hopefully we will learn. And we appreciate you learning with us.
Thank you.